Good evening, everybody. This evening is a really exciting challenge or chat for me tonight. And it's also really close to my heart because it affects my own daughter directly. But tonight I'm talking to a group of ladies who have formed an organization called TEL. And TEL is an organization which really promotes why we should be organ donors. Think about yourselves in terms of how you can become an organ donor and what kind of discussions you would have with your family around being an organ donor. And so that's what we're going to discuss tonight. The ladies will tell you about the organization, a bit about their own circumstances, and then we're going to discuss why it's so important to be organ donors. So I'm going to bring them in. So the first person I'm bringing in is Stella. Good evening, Stella.
Good evening, Lauren. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
It's a pleasure. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, so I was diagnosed with kidney failure in 2011. I didn't have any symptoms beforehand, so it was quite a shock, and I had to start dialysis immediately. So that's been, my life since 2011. It's 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time that I'm doing dialysis. And I've been on the kidney transplant list for about 9 years. So that's short and sweet. And I'm the managing director of TEL.
Thank you. Hi, Alice. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Alice. I'm turning 37 this month, and I've had 2 bilateral lung transplants. So bilateral means both lungs at the same time. My first one was when I was 23. I was born with a genetic disease called cystic fibrosis, which means that your body produces excess mucus, which ends up really messing up your lungs. You get crazy bacterial infections, and the bacteria colonizes in your lungs. And in the end, it's all antibiotic resistant, and you've got scarring, mucus. It's just a bit of a mess. So in any case, at 23, I had my first transplant. Things went very well for 5 years, and then I started getting a slight bit of a drop in lung function, which is eventually diagnosed as chronic rejection through a process of elimination. So if your lung function is dropping and there's nothing wrong with you, then they put it down to chronic rejection. So they managed to stabilize it quite a bit, and it took another 5 years for my lungs to finally not be, that great anymore. And it gave the doctors time to consider doing a second transplant on me, which they did, luckily. I waited a year for my second transplant, and it'll be 4 years this year that I've had the second transplant. So I think that's pretty awesome, yes.
So Fawn, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Fawn, and like Alice, I also have cystic fibrosis. So I'm not going to explain what that is because I think she did a pretty good job. I grew up very ill. I was in and out of hospital my whole life, to the point where about a year or so before I needed a transplant or was listed for a transplant, I was completely bedridden. So I had a feeding tube, which was surgically inserted. I'm diabetic, so I had a diabetic pump. I also had no vein access, so I had to have a portacath surgically inserted. And then, of course, I had my oxygen. So I was just completely bedridden, full of tubes, and I waited about 8 months for my transplant, the longest 8 months ever. And I got my lungs, also bilateral, so double lung. And since then, I am a completely new person. I'm not bedridden anymore, clearly. Out and about. I have my own company. I got married last year, and living a very happy, healthy life with my husband.
All exciting. And then Corinne. Corinne's my daughter, and I'm really excited that she's part of this team. So Corinne, tell everybody a bit about yourself.
So I'm Corinne, Karen's mom. Karen's daughter. Sorry. And I was born with autoimmune hepatitis. So there are various kinds of autoimmune diseases when it comes to hepatitis. I was diagnosed with the children's one, and just after I turned a year old. And generally the age or living age is that children don't make the age of 5 for this disease. With steroids and corticosteroids and medication, they can manage up until about the age of 10, because it is a really tough condition on your body. But I'm turning 31, so somehow I've managed to outlive the odds. And in September 2019, I was listed on the liver transplant list. And for nearly 2 years now, I've been waiting, but I have a potential donor and will hopefully get transplanted in October. I joined TEL last year, absolutely amazing organization. And I'm now the project manager. Yeah.
So Stella, do you want to tell us what TEL stands for and what it means? You muted.
Sorry, guys.
We have to have one of those. It's done now.
Yeah, no, icebreaker there. We had to have some difficulties. So TEL stands for Transplant Education for Living Legacies. It's a non-profit organization, and we basically aim to raise awareness about the need, for people to have the discussion about organ and tissue donation. It's very important, as you can see, all of us have got a vested interest to make sure that, the awareness is out there and that people have the discussion. And one of the reasons that a lot of people, and especially in series, they would say, yeah, no, this person is a registered organ donor, and, they're going to then start the process, and, some of the same day, the whole process start. Now, in real life, that's unfortunately not how it works. It's a very long process and it's very involved. But with regards to registration, it's good for marketing and to use it as awareness. But at the end of the day, it's not a legally binding document and it's not consent. So the most important part is to have that conversation with your family. They would be the ones who need to give consent for the process to start. If you have 5 family members and one of them does not agree, then the medical team will walk away. They need to make sure that everyone is in agreement and that they all give consent. So we want people to, while everyone's healthy and not stressed out, to have the conversation. If there's things that you need to find out from your religious person, or if you think there's some myths that Alice will later, talk to us about, but there's just find the information and have the discussion, because make sure that your family knows what your wishes are.
So any of you could answer this, but could you tell me, why do you think it's important for schools to start the process as well and have the discussions at school?
I think from my side, I think school kids are very open-minded, and they haven't been tainted by the world yet. They believe in good and they believe in, the right thing. It's almost like their conscience is still clear. They know what's right, they know what's wrong, and they're almost like no nonsense. Like if something makes sense to them, oh, you're going to save people's lives, then they're super keen to do it. They don't come with like religious worries or myths that they've heard, etc. So that, and also, obviously, like the younger you plant a seed, the better, so. And sometimes these kids go home and tell their parents about organ donation and what they learned, and normally they would tell their parents, oh, I want to be an organ donor someday. And so it's almost like you're reaching the whole family.
Oh,
I know
thanks,
that to answer your question as well, or to add to it, what Alice has been saying, what's really special for me is that I work in a school environment, and working in a school environment, a lot of the girls that I work with know about my story. And because of that, it's then encouraged a few of them to become organ donors. Some of them have gotten tattoos, probably a little bit illegally, but it's all for the cause and things. But they wanting to ask questions and they like knowing more about it. And exactly with that if they know that they're helping someone, or they just think a little bit more outside the box. And I think when they're in the school environment, that they're willing to hear you out and give it an opportunity and give it a try. I had a girl after one of the talks that we did last week message to say that how can she, so she's in matric, how can she become an organ donor, and how can she do it if she wants to be a living donor for somebody? And I think that's really special, that somehow that if we're making small changes like that within our youth, imagine the impact that we can make, because if they're starting the conversation and they're having the conversation then at home, and they're the ones pushing the conversation, I think it's so important to start there. It's almost like starting with the grassroots of sport. Yeah.
So Alice, you were going to talk about the myths and the misconceptions. What do you want to share about that?
Yeah, so I thought I'll just touch on a few, that I've heard most often. So firstly, it doesn't cost you anything to be an organ donor, and it doesn't cost your family anything. So being on the donor side is completely free. The recipients pay for everything. So they normally split the costs of retrieving the organs, and the cost of all the tests that needs to be done on the donor gets split between the recipients. So it does not fall on the family. Another thing is that it won't delay your funeral or your cremation. So I think when a loved one dies, a lot of people just want things to be over with as soon as possible. And I think they might worry that this is going to delay this by like a week or whatever. Whereas, there might be a slight delay, but they, for specific religions, like Islam, where the person has to be buried within a specific time, they do accommodate those people very well, because, they do respect the donor's religion and the family's wishes, like Stella said. So, if you make it clear that you need to be, to bury your loved one within 24 hours, then they can do that. So it won't delay the funeral. And also the body does not get maimed in any way. So they really treat the body with the utmost of respect, just like a normal surgery. So it's like going for a normal surgery. If they procure an organ, they stitch you back up the same way that they would any person who gets cut open. And in terms of tissue donation, if you are able to donate bone, they actually replace it with prosthetic bone so that you don't look different from the outside, So you are even able to have an open casket funeral if that's what you would like. There's no way that anyone would know, your body has changed or anything like that. So yes, I think that's a big concern for people. And then another myth that I've heard some people say is that, if paramedics and doctors know you're an organ donor, they're not going to try as hard to save your life, which is an understandable concern, because in the movies you always see, or in Grey's Anatomy, you see, there's this person coming into the emergency department, and then one of like the nurses who work there are like, oh, but she's O positive blood group. And then someone at the transplant team hears it, and things happen, for the sake of drama. But in real life, there are very few transplant centers in the country. It's almost like one in every city, and not even all the cities. So like Bloem, Cape Town, Joburg, Pretoria, that's about it. So the odds that the hospital where you end up passing away is even a transplant hospital is extremely small, So those doctors and paramedics don't know anyone on the waiting list for organs, and they've got no, incentive to try and get your organs. And also they don't want a death on their name. It's not going to make them look good for a patient to not be treated properly.
Yeah.
And there's a reason, like the teams are extremely independent. So even the two doctors who need to declare brain death aren't allowed to be part of the treating team, and they need to have a certain amount of experience of, being doctors. So everything is very impartial. And then, once that's been done, the transplant team, who up until now hasn't known about any of this, then they get contacted. So there's really no sharing of unsolicited information and dodgy dealings going on. Like that would literally almost be impossible.
Yeah, I think that what you just shared is really important. For me, an interesting thing that because of Corrine that we've learned in the recent while is because hers is going to be a living donor, and because the person is not a family relative, the Department of Health has actually had to vet it. And the reason for that is to make sure that there's no organ trafficking. And I think that's really great that that there are these steps in the process that people can't be abused, because I think things like organ trafficking does take place. And I mean, it's a reality in some countries. I mean, the stats in India are quite crazy. I'm not sure what the stats are here, but it does happen. So to know that our government is still looking at those types of things, even in cases like where COVID is so prolific and they've got all these other things on their plates, that things like organ transplants are still being validated, for me is really, really exciting. That those kinds of processes are in place, I think is really important.
Yeah, and Karen, we are, sorry, Alice, we are a signatory to the Istanbul Agreement, which focuses on prevention of transplant tourism. So that is really important also, just to note, legally, we have got, things in place.
As in South Africa.
South Africa, yes. So there's quite a lot of countries are signatory to the Istanbul Agreement, and that basically covers all of the transplant tourism and trafficking in organs and things like that. It's not to say it doesn't happen in the world, but as far as South Africa is concerned, I think I can't say it doesn't happen, but it's definitely not prolific.
That's really
well,
great.
I've waited for an organ twice, and I feel like I'm sure that I would have known about a black market if there was one for me to go buy lungs from. Not that I would trust it, but surely someone on the waiting list knows about this black market if they're all waiting, and people are waiting 12 to 15 years for a kidney, like Stella. I'm sure Stella would have researched the black market by now if there was one. But what I wanted to say...
That's a bit dodged.
I would not be able to wait for like that long. So what I wanted to say is, I think that's why it's a good thing that your family needs to give permission. The whole family, your gesin, the people in your household need to give permission, because I think that adds weight, or it makes it even more difficult for organ trafficking, to take place. And I think it's kind of good that they can't just go face value on a sticker on your driver's license or even on your will and say, oh, but this is what he or she wanted, and then drag your body away and your family's like, no, we don't want it. So I think it just adds some ethical validity to the whole process.
So Fawn, can you talk to us about what's happened because of COVID and transplants?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure, as you can imagine, COVID has affected all industries, all healthcare sectors, and transplant was no exception to that. It's just the hospitals have been completely full, and where there's an ICU bed, it's sort of, they just get a COVID patient in there. They don't kind of allocate that for a transplant patient. It's all hands on deck and everything goes towards COVID. So there's been a huge delay in some transplant centers where they've actually stopped doing transplants completely. Others use their discretion to carry on. But in general, there's been a lot less transplantations happening. And another reason for that is because when a transplant takes place, you as the donor, your immune system is completely suppressed. So your chances of getting seriously infected with anything are very high. So if a patient got COVID, for example, I mean, that would be life-threatening. I mean, it's life-threatening anyway for a normal person, but someone that's just come out of transplant, it's not worth the risk. So they've had to hold off on a lot of transplants. And what that's done, especially to something like people waiting for kidneys, is it's extended the waiting period. So instead of waiting 8 to 10 years, people will now be waiting 12 to 15 years. And that's, if COVID starts to settle, if we carry on like this, those numbers will grow. And I think it's important to know this, because that means that once COVID does settle, and we essentially want to start playing catch up with transplant because we haven't done any. And we want people to tell their loved ones that they're donors, and let's not let that be a barrier as well as COVID to transplantation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm putting up a graphic, and I'd love for one of you to explain to us in terms of, so you've spoken about organ donors and you've spoken about tissue donors, and so there's this whole mix. If some of you would like to explain, looking at this little graphic, what falls under what, and is there a different process? So if you could give us some information around that. I'm not sure who'd like to address that. Fawn, did you want to? You were nodding.
Oh, yeah, I can. So we basically split the two sort of things categories that you could donate into solid organs, and those are your life-saving organs. So without these, the patient will die. Eventually die. So with kidneys, you can be on dialysis, which will prolong your life, but eventually you'll have complications from that and pass away. So the solid organs are kidneys, and there's obviously 2 kidneys: your heart, your liver, which can be split, your lungs, which there are 2 of, and your pancreas. So those are your solid organs. And then the rest is kind of put into the category of life-changing or enhancing. So these won't necessarily save a life, like a cornea, but it will greatly improve a life. So your cornea, bone, skin's a big one, because in some cases it does save a life when people have lost, due to fire or whatever, they've lost a large amount of skin and are very prone to infection. Having a real skin will actually save their life. So yeah, there's up to is it 50 or 100 people that can tissues can change their lives.
Wow.
I think it's 50.
50, yeah.
And also, just to add to that, then you get a deceased donor and a living donor. So obviously, the norm would be if you have 2, you can live with 1. So the kidneys, you can give 1 away, for a living donor, and the liver, you can donate part of your liver. Overseas, I know, and it's in rare occasions where they do take a lobe of your lung, but it's not really something that they do on a regular basis. And an interesting one is the hip bone. If you go for a hip replacement, then that femoral head, they can then make bone cement from, and they can use it in orthopedic operations again. So you're almost recycling, because if you have a hip replacement, they will use bone cement from someone else who donated a hip bone or a femur or, a bone. So it's, you're basically helping yourself, because you never know when you would need another operation again. And so that's also just, people need to understand that they're giving back to the community, because everything stays in their community. So you're helping yourself, but you're also helping your fellow man, woman.
Yes. So I mean, I didn't know that. My grandmother had both her hips replaced, and the doctors never told us that about the bone cement. That's really interesting. I suppose all of these stories we should be telling people more and more, because there's just so much. And if you're saying that there are 50 types or 50 people could benefit, just think of that in terms of, we talk about 7 because of the big organs, but it's actually a lot. So
sorry, just one other thing. I mean, like the bone can be stored up to 10 years, but they don't store it that long because there's always a shortage of bone. So, but I mean, it's just amazing that the impact you can have, and that bone would have been cremated, especially for it's medical waste. So no one would have used it if you didn't ask it to be donated.
Oh,
and
wow.
what's also interesting about with what Stella was saying about the liver is that even when the person has passed away, you can still split the liver again. So like if you have an adult that needs to be transplanted and a child, the child would get the smaller portion of the liver and the adult would get the bigger portion of the liver. So even once the person has passed away and you donating the liver can get separated too.
Wow. Stella, Alice, the other day you told us a really interesting story. I think you said it was in Argentina, about a woman whose mother and sister donated a lung lobe. Do you want to tell the story?
In the US, it's in the States. I don't actually think any center does it anymore because the results weren't fantastic. But this specific girl, her name is Christy, I can't remember. But she has been living for more than 10 years now with her mom's lobe and her aunt's lobe.
Oh,
So
wow.
she was waiting for a proper lung transplant, like, a full set of lungs. And she also had cystic fibrosis, and she was just so desperately ill that she wouldn't have lived another month. So as a last resort, I think the mom and the aunt kind of volunteered and said, look, can't you do this to try and save her? And then the doctors agreed. And they did it. And I mean, there is, you can Google it on the internet, and there are a few cases, but it's definitely not ideal because, the liver regenerates and it can grow again, but lungs don't. So, if you only have literally 2/5 of normal lung capacity, which is what you would get with 2 lobes, it doesn't improve. So, in other words, it's almost like you will still be breathless for the rest of your life, but just not as much. Whereas a full set from a donor should, if it's successful, make you completely able to breathe easily. So, yes, it's definitely not ideal, but it saved her life, and she's been going for more than 10 years. So, that has been done.
Stella, in terms of kidneys, if somebody donates a kidney, what is their quality of life like after donating a kidney? Does it affect the living donor's quality of life?
That's why they need to go through vigorous testing. The process is really, as I said, if you want to make sure you have a good medical, then volunteer to be a living donor, because they make sure that as far as possible, because look, it's never 100%, but they try and make sure that your situation isn't different, before the transplant or after. So that would typically be someone who is really healthy, who doesn't have any chronic conditions. So you can't have a high blood. This is not for a living donor. A deceased donor is a totally different story. But for the living donor, you can't have any chronic conditions. You need to be fit. You need to be healthy. So there's a lot of tests that go in to make sure mentally and physically that you're well. And most of the donors actually live longer than the normal population would because they were healthy, to start off with. So it's not because they gave a kidney away that they're more healthy. They were healthy, to start off with. So yeah, it's not just, anyone can walk in and say, okay, I want to donate a kidney. You need to go through that test to make sure, because they can't put you in a worse position to help me, because that's not going to help anyone. So then you sit with 2 people with kidney failure, and that's not ideal. So, yeah.
Thank you. Corinne, you were going to tell us about the month and what TEL is doing about the organ donor month and the kinds of things that you are driving awareness for.
So what we initially said is that obviously one of our biggest things is all about having the conversation and telling the people that are closest to you that you choose to be an organ donor. But what we're encouraging the public to do now for August, because August is Organ Donor Month, is to tell your community. So we have posters on our website. the website's in the banner that's running across the bottom of the screen now. And you can download posters, you can have them printed at your local printer, and go and get them put up at your doctor or your physio or your gym or those sort of things. We're trying to encourage the conversation around organ donation and not just keeping it to yourself. We also have social media posts, so if you don't want to go and get it printed, then you can share it onto your social media and encourage your friends and your family to do the same. Alongside our Tell Your Community campaign is we also have our Make It Known tattoo campaign. So it's our quotation marks that we have. It's a part of our logo. And it's also, again, about starting the conversation. And it's quite an interesting tattoo, because if you get it, a lot of people then ask questions about why do you have a pause sign or why do you have an equal sign tattooed on you, and there the conversation gets going to say, no, it's neither of those. It's quotation marks all about that I'm choosing to be an organ donor. So it's not an official symbol, but it is something that we're trying to encourage. And we currently have, I think it's just over 20 studios signed up now for August, that you can go throughout the country where you can go and get your tattoos done. Yeah, so check on the website for the posters, download the posters, and go and get it done permanently at a local tattoo studio.
Did you show everybody your tattoo and talk about how you got it to be explained? So do you want to talk about your own tattoo? Your tattoo?
Yeah, this one.
Yes. So
yeah,
did you show it?
Yeah, I did.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I did that.
So nice, show it twice.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was thinking that the posters on the website are really amazing in terms of getting people to really promote those posters. So I'm going to put the link into the comments. So paste the download the posters and put them into your communities. So what are the kinds of spaces where you think people could go and put them up? Where are you thinking they should be displayed? And have any of you handed out any posters, and what reaction have you had?
So I've put up one at my doctor's rooms, and at Moorpark's transplant unit, or transplant, the transplant offices. So I've dropped one off there, and also at my biokineticist, they were very happy to put the poster up. So I basically saw two reactions at the transplant unit. They were busy in a meeting, so I kind of just gave it to them. So I wasn't able to see the reaction. But they've been good. And I think other places it's like baby clinics, any sort of clinic, any sort of medical environment, really. And then obviously, I suppose you could put it up at your work, or anywhere you've got access to.
Yeah, I've got at the dialysis center, I gave it to one of the clinical technologists, and he put it up at a gay club. So I don't think anything is off limits. I've put it up at pharmacies. The action was quite, it's striking, and they like, but what is this about? And then, people start to look at it and actually read and see, what it is about. So yeah, I think, and the posters also is it's in English, Afrikaans, Zulu, Xhosa, Tsonga, and Venda. I think I've covered
and Sotho. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's it's really like any place, from a church to a club, doctors' rooms, anywhere. We want to have the conversation any time of the day. It doesn't matter where. Nothing is off limits.
And just to add to that, with that in mind, we have got 3 different designs, because we understand that something that you would put in a doctor's room might look a lot different from what you would put in a nightclub. So we've got some options for people to see what resonates with you and where you want to put it.
So do one of you want to perhaps share your screen and show us what the the website looks like, or I'm on the website, but I can't actually see where the posters are. So if one of you wants to share your screen and
Yeah, you
show
can
us.
share it with me. Yeah, can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just opening it up before I share my screen.
Yeah. Well, it's going to live at the bottom till we pop it, so it's all good. So while we're doing that, why did you do so many languages? And the other thing is, so could people then, do you think, have the discussions with perhaps other people in their household, like domestic workers or gardeners, or to sort of share with them? How do we actually get the message out? So putting up the posters is one thing. How do we also get the conversation going? So in terms of your social media, what are the kinds of tips you would give people to start the conversation?
Well, that's obviously one of the reasons why the tattoo is so amazing. Because normally when you've got a tattoo, people ask, like, what does that mean? Or what does it stand for? So that's an obvious one. There's obviously, like, you do normally discuss, like, whether you would one day want to be buried or cremated. At some point that conversation comes up. And that would obviously be a good time to throw it in there and say, I want to be cremated, but before you do that, please let them use any organ that they can, so that might be a good idea. Or I don't know if all people do this, but I know some people, even before they pass away, they do actually give their will to their children already. So it's not how it happens in the movies when everyone is dramatically called in. But I mean, if it is in your will and you give your will to your family before you pass away, and they read it, then that would obviously help. And I think even stuff like, if we're on the radio like the whole month, so if you come home and you're like, oh, today on the radio I heard them talking about organ donation, and then it doesn't have to be a serious conversation. It can just be like, oh, today I heard this, and that would start a conversation. Or if the posters are up, while people are sitting in the doctor's room waiting for 4 hours, and they see the poster of, donating organs, then surely it will start a conversation.
So I was looking for research around stats and numbers and things like that. And the statistics are saying that on average already in 2016, there were 4,300 people on the waiting list. And when we had that discussion the other day, some of you were saying the number's much higher. Do you think that part of the discussion is going to universities and to medical doctors and saying, shouldn't we be doing research around this kind of thing? Shouldn't we have more up-to-date research? Is it not something we flag with the Department of Health and Statistics South Africa and say, shouldn't there be a stat on Statistics South Africa around this kind of information? How could we start that kind of telling, do you think?
Yeah, you can go for it.
It's a difficult one. And I mean, especially with the current climate as it is, COVID so prevalent that, the health department and all medical sort of fraternities are just overwhelmed. So for us to even, broach the subject it's going to fall on deaf ears. So for us, the strategy is more to rally the public, get support, make it known that this is a situation. The number, that 4,300 whatever, is definitely a lot higher and will continue to grow, especially after COVID. So I think when people are aware of the issue, it's sort of the pressure becomes a lot harder to ignore. And then it's more appropriate to go to the government and those sort of places and start saying, like, hey guys, like, everyone's asking, like, where are these numbers, what's being done, and you need to get involved with this. It's not just 5 or 10 people waiting for kidneys, it's thousands of people, and it's millions of people who want to be donors and they want to know what's happening. So yeah, for us it's sort of public first, and then government secondary.
I mean, it might be interesting just to send an email to all the different universities, because students are still studying. they're still all trying to research, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your medical students. It could be your psychologists, even your sociologists, the impact of transplant, and maybe that's creating another form of awareness, because they would then be finding people to use for the research who would then could start the conversations. And it might just be popping an email out to all the universities. If there are any university lecturers or people listening, it would be great to get your feedback around that as well, because I do think we need broader kind of discussions around it. Do you want to talk through some of these posters, Corinne?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Can you share my screen?
I have.
Okay, so we've got you don't need a badge to be a hero. This one's quite a cute one. I love this picture. So we've got the 3 different ones that Fawn spoke about and the different pictures. This one's Don't Trash Transplant. And then our third one is 1 in 6, and each one does have a blurb at the bottom. I see the ones that I've opened though. So these ones are for social media, but our general posters, these big ones, when you put them up, they've got a QR code that then takes you through to our website with more information.
Can you just explain this 1 in 6?
So the 1 in 6, you're 6 times more likely to be to need an organ than you are able to donate one.
Wow.
So that's why it's so important about having the conversation. Let me just open one of the other bigger ones.
It's also just to highlight that there's such a small chance of people actually being able to be an organ donor, that a lot of people would think, oh, but I don't need to, even think about it. But that's just to show that, the chances of you actually needing an organ is a lot higher than you would be able to donate one.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing this. So as we're beginning to close, I was wondering if you'd each like to share, why do you think, or what would you actually give people advice about to start the conversation? What would your tip be, and where would you suggest they should first go and get the poster put up? So is there a challenge? How many posters can we get put up in August? Perhaps they can share photos to you on social media about where they put their posters up. So who'd like to go? How would you like to end? Tell us.
Yeah, I think with that idea, I'm just thinking that it would actually be a nice challenge to say who's got the most unique place that they put up a poster. So ask people to be a bit creative with regards to those, and send us photos and tag us, and we can see what we can come up with from our side. I think in closing, for me, it's just any time is the right time to have the conversation. Don't wait. Have it today, and you know your family, how to talk to them, and just be honest. That's the best policy, is just to say, listen, if I don't know how to start a conversation, start with, I don't know how to start this conversation, but I think it's important, and my wishes is that I one day want to be an organ and tissue donation. I heard it can save so many lives.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stella. Who'd like to go next?
I'll go. So I think for me, it's, like our name, Transplant Education for Living Legacy, states that you are leaving a legacy when you leave your organs behind. I mean, I celebrate my lungiversary every year. It's the biggest party, bigger than Christmas and birthdays. And we celebrate the donor. Yes, I'm happy to be alive, but we also celebrate that someone said yes. And I don't know who my donor was. It was anonymous. I don't know the family. I did send an anonymous thank you letter to them. But I like to think that if they knew what their gift had given me, it really is the greatest gift. And the only way that you can do that and leave a legacy is to tell your family that that's what you want to do. Because once you're sick or you're in a situation where you are able to be a donor, it's too late to have the discussion. So don't wait, tell them now, and give the gift that of the legacy.
The gift of giving. Corey?
Yeah,
Oh,
No,
sorry.
get Alice. Alice is ready. Go, Alice.
I think, like Fawn said, your family, or Stella said it, you know what type of family you have. So I would say, obviously, if you're watching this, you could go to your family member that you think might respond the best, and be like, oh, so last night I watched this webinar and they were talking to these girls, and can you believe this one is like been waiting almost 10 years for a kidney? And you just bring it up into conversation. The same way, I think people who know the four of us have definitely said to their families, my friend Alice is waiting for another lung transplant, So I think that brings it closer to home. So whether it's that, or whether it's that you watched something tonight, just make it relevant in the moment, so that your family, you don't want to give the impression necessarily that you've been sitting in your room thinking about death, like I think if I was a parent, I would probably be quite freaked out if my child came to me and be like, I've been thinking, and make it all serious. So I think just make it relevant, and introduce the subject, and maybe in 2 months' time say something again. Just talk about a movie that you saw or something on Grey's Anatomy. And I think it might become easier, as you mention it here and there, maybe it gets easier to actually be serious about it.
Corinne?
I think also just another way that if it isn't something that's very comfortable in your household or an easy discussion to have, even if there is maybe somebody that you think you can approach but you're still unsure, you could start the conversation by saying something like what Alice said about, did you see this webinar, and what are your thoughts on organ donation, and have you ever considered it, or do you know someone that has? Or you can start it like that. It doesn't necessarily need to be like go in full tilt, when I die they must take all of me kind of thing. But I think if you broach the conversation in more of a discussion way, where you're getting the conversation going and saying, is this ever something you've thought about, then it could start as a little bit easier like that, and a little bit gently.
So I want to say to all of you, thank you so much for your time this evening and for sharing. For those of you watching, I really do hope that you hop onto the tel.org.za website. Go and download the posters in a range of languages. Go and take these posters out and hand them out. If your children are not on school holidays, please take them to school and start the conversation. That car park chatter? We'll turn it into an organ donor chatter this month, and get as many parents to be having those posters, putting them up in the communities, and start the conversation. Because if we want anything to change, whatever it is, we have to talk about it. And in this instance, it's organ donation. So let's start the conversation. If any of you listening are teachers or people who are studying, think about doing your research around organ donation and how that can actually impact both studies and the community. So to the ladies tonight, I really applaud you for what you're doing. I loved your Christmas decorations that you did last year on all the different donors. I really think we should punt that this year again, the posters and the kind of thing. But getting the message out, having the discussion in different ways, for me is really, really special. So thank you to each and all of you. To everybody out there, thanks for this evening. I'm ending the call. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.